I'm Mike Chambers, and this is a Payments Unpacked briefing on the Payment Systems Regulator. As I go through this presentation on the PSR, please note that all information is publicly available and was accessed from the PSR's website on the 5th of July 2024. So let's start with a Payments Unpacked briefing on the Payment System Regulator. And we're in a situation where, if we look back on history, you can trace the changing regulatory landscape of payments in the UK back as far as 1984, with the formation of a trade body called Apex as a result of the 1984 Childs Report, which sought to sort out banking and payments and payment systems in the context of a self-governing body. That lasted quite a long while until we get to about 2000, when the then Chancellor Gordon Brown commissioned a review on banking services in the UK, and it was published by a guy called Cruikshank, and it became really known in parlance as the Cruikshank Review. And within that review, we saw the real formation of the need or the desire for a regulatory body to look after payments in the UK with a concept or an idea of an organisation at that point called PAYCOM. And not much happened after that in terms of the formation of the regulatory side until we get to about 2013, when the then Conservative and Lib Dem coalition government issued a consultation called Opening Up UK Payments. Part of that review in 2013 led to the creation, under the Financial Services Banking Reform Act of 2013, the creation of the PSR commenced their work in 2014 and become fully operational by the 1st of April 2015. And again, using publicly sourced information from the PSR's website, and we can see three statutory objectives that underpin everything that the PSR does. And the first of those is to ensure that the way that payment systems are operated and developed, that they're done in a way that considers and promotes the interests of all the businesses and the consumers that use them. So we don't see payment systems really there to serve just the banks and to meet the bank's needs. It should be a balance of both sides of a transaction, the businesses and consumers and the banks in the middle. The second is for the objective of the PSR is to promote effective competition in the markets for payment systems and services, and that effective competition in the context of operators, payment service providers and infrastructure providers. And finally, the third objective is to promote the development of and innovation in payment systems, and in particular with a focus on infrastructure used to operate those systems. The PSR has a range of competition powers and regulatory powers, and as we look at them on the screen here, I think we conclude they're very strong regulatory and competition powers. We could see as a regulator the PSR giving directions to take action and set standards. We might see them imposing requirements regarding system rules. We might see the PSR telling operators to provide direct access to payment systems for people. We might see the PSPs being provided indirect access to smaller PSPs. We might see the PSR amending agreements relating to payment systems, and those agreements could include fees and charges, and they might investigate behaviour that's not consistent with the overall PSR directions. And again, as you'd expect from a payments regulator, where they see anti-competitive behaviour alongside the CMA, they may choose to act. As an organisation, the PSR is independent. It has its own managing director and board. As we've looked on the previous slide, it's charged with strong competition and regulatory powers. Its funding is by the industry, and that's largely payment service providers. The PSR is accountable to Parliament, and it operates as an independent subsidiary of the Financial Conduct Authority. And of course, from a payments perspective, the PSR works within sort of a collegiate arrangement from regulatory, and the tripartite arrangement includes the Bank of England, who are looking to ensure financial stability and promote the resilience of payment systems, the FCA, who are looking to protect consumers, protect financial markets and promote competition, and that arrangement includes the PSR looking to promote the interests of people and businesses who are using payment systems through the promotion of competition and innovation. regulation. And we see an excellent Venn diagram here of that tripartite arrangement between three regulators and where they have responsibilities on their own and where those responsibilities either intersect with one other regulator or in the fact of those right at the center, things like access to cash and crypto assets task force and CBDCs, where it is the responsibility of all three of the regulators. The PSR would ultimately look to regulate payment systems, and the current payment systems are listed on this screen. From the outset, we saw BACS, check and credit, CHAPS, and faster payments and Link covered by regulation as a payment system by the PSR, together with the cards, MasterCard and Visa Europe. And you can see from the final one on the screen, it isn't a static list. And in August 2022, the Sterling Finality Payment System became a designating payment system. And you can see there it's because it's focused on wholesale and high value payments backed by central money. So it was seen as systemically important and added to the list of organizations, payment systems that the PSR regulate. Now, they're the payment systems the PSRs regulate, and in that context, the PSR would regulate participants, and the first of the system operators, you might know those as Pay.UK, as the operator of BACS, Faster Payments, Check and Credit Clearing, who also operate the Image Check Clearing Service, Visa, MasterCard and Link, and then payment service providers, who might be the banks and the building societies, merchant acquirers, payment institutions that are using those systems, and then finally infrastructure providers providing the underlying systems for those payment systems. So you might know as VocaLink, for example, who are providing the infrastructure for Link, BACS and faster payments. The PSR has quite a big toolbox, quite a comprehensive toolbox of regulatory tools. They might be legislation, they might issue rules, they're sometimes called general directions and requirements. They might provide written guidance and sometimes a specific direction or a specific requirement for a decision. And as you see, those rules, decisions and guidance can apply to participants of the payment system, and that's defined as an operator, a payment service provider, or an infrastructure provider. And sometimes those powers may apply more broadly. For example, the competition powers that the PSR have apply to all payment systems, not those systems that we saw were designated by the HM Treasury as significantly, systemically important. Sometimes the PSR issues things in terms of where they see that things have gone wrong. And here are three examples since the PSR was formed. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see that Check and Credit Clearing at the time, the operator of the check clearing system, were publicly censured because they didn't meet the requirements in terms of publishing board minutes. And you can see that on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, you can see that sometimes it's a monetary fine. And the top left looks at the PSR fining Barclays Bank 8.4 million for breaking interchange fee rules. And the bottom, the PSR fines 5 companies for over £33 million for cartel behaviour in the prepaid cards market. It's important to note that when the PSR issue a fine and they receive those fines, they don't keep the money themselves. They have to give it back to HM Treasury. The PSR is about halfway through a current 5-year strategic plan, and the strategic plan they have really is based around 4 strategic outcomes. And those 4 strategic outcomes are, firstly, that everybody has access to payment systems that meet their needs. Secondly, that users of those payment services are adequately protected when they're using systems and services. And because they feel adequately protected, they can use them with confidence. Thirdly, that payment systems will enable effective competition in the provision of payment services. And final outcome is that payment systems are efficient and commercially stable. And you can see from those 4 outcomes, the bottom box is that those 4 strategic outcomes drive 4 priorities, which is around continued access, alternative payments options, ensuring people are adequately and are sufficiently protected, making sure there's competition between and within the payment systems, and making sure that rules foster innovation and competition in payments. Each year the PSR publish an annual plan and budget. This plan was for 24-25, was issued in April 2024, and the commitments that the PSR said they would be doing within those 12-month period really center around the 4 categories of protection, competition, unlocking account-to-account payments, and ensuring access and choice to payments. On the right-hand side, we see the elements of the commitments for 24-25 that relate to protection, and you can see a heavy emphasis on APP fraud reimbursement, and we'll see that come through in October in terms of mandatory reimbursement. On the right, you can see APP fraud data, so it's about making fraud data publicly available where people can see payment service providers' performance on APP fraud. And on the bottom right hand corner, it's the final mile, the final furlong in terms of the introduction and coverage of confirmation of payee across payment institutions by October 2024. So one of the strategic commitments for the PSR this year is around protection and a heavy focus on the final furlong of confirmation of payee and the introduction of mandatory reimbursement for authorised push payment fraud. The second commitments for this year around the PSR related to competition, and you can see there on the screen that most of that is really looking at the competition that MasterCard and Visa faced in card payments, and looking at interim and final reports, and looking at reviews in terms of interchange fees market review. On the right-hand side, we see unlocking account-to-account payments as a significant commitment for the PSR for this year. Firstly, in terms of unlocking account-to-account payments, and secondly, in terms of the introduction of variable recurring payments for more commercial type scenarios. So we're seeing a real push there from the PSR around open banking and open payments in the terms of account-to-account as an alternative to cards, and also to unlock competition, but also introduce variable recurring payments as an alternative or complement to card payments and direct debit itself. PSR are also looking at access and choice, and you'll see there an annual review of a link in terms of maintaining access to free to use cash machines, but secondly looking at the barriers that consumers face in terms of digital payments, looking at the take up of digital payments, and ensuring that other work around APP fraud and account to account payments also increases access, increases choice, and by that it increases trust and control for users. A difference for the PSR for this year is also on the right hand side, where you start to see the PSR working very different in terms of strategic engagement with market participants and the wider users of payments in general, and also looking at their supervisory approach and compliance monitoring framework. So you're really seeing a different emphasis from the PSR in those two areas. Within the PSR's work plan for 24-25, you'll find these particular graphics where we start to see the PSR's work plan being measured out through the course of the year. I mentioned the PSR strategy is a 5-year strategy. It's a halfway point for the PSR, so they're in a halfway review. How well have they done against the objectives, and what do they need to do for the remaining period of time? They're also looking at market review of cross-border interchange fees that I mentioned, and connected to that, a review of scheme and processing the fees in the context of cards. From an ATM and digital payments point of view, it's looking at in terms of link, in terms of access to cash, and secondly in terms of digital payments consumer research report, publishing that and understanding what to do with it. And again, looking authorized push payment fraud, and you can see there the months in which things are being executed this year, the inclusion of CHAPS in mandatory reimbursements and not just faster payments, in terms of reporting and in terms of guidance consultation as well, but all working forward to the 7th of October, when we'll see mandatory reimbursement for APP fraud enter into the United Kingdom. This slide also, you'll see even more of the detail there about the APP scams and the work to make sure that the fraudster is thwarted in his or her endeavours in terms of defrauding UK consumers. We see there unlocking account-to-account payments, and we see the context there in terms of moving on from the JROC report, the industry coming together, the regulators coming together, and the focus from a payments point of view being really around variable recurring payments and account-to-account payments in the context of the future open banking entity. And each year the PSR publish an annual report and accounts. It's sort of interesting. The most interesting thing is when they publish the work plan, and as I've said, this work plan covers 24, so at the beginning of 25, around about March, to see the plan for the next 12 months, which I'm sure will reflect the findings from the mid-term review of the PSR's 5-year strategy. I mentioned earlier on that the PSR is funded by the participants, by the banks, and for 24, the total budget for the PSR is £28 million. You'll see the breakdown there. They look to see where they can gain economies of scale with the Financial Conduct Authority, but you'll see heavy emphasis there on people in terms of staff costs and professional fees to make sure that the PSR is able to meet their commitments for each year. I'm Mike Chambers. This is the Payments Unpacked briefing on the Payment Systems Regulator. As I mentioned, all information is publicly available and was accessed from the PSR's website on the 5th of July 2024. Please subscribe with the button below or via payments-unpacked.com to make sure you receive the Payments Unpacked newsletter and notice of any future briefings.